Welcome to Barry's in the Interim podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of innovative clinical trial design for the pharmaceutical and medical industries, and so much more. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome everybody back to In the Interim. I'm Scott Barry at Barry Consultants, and I have a really cool topic for today. We're going to talk about Leonard Jimmie Savage, and we have perhaps the best person to talk to it, who's also, by the way, my father. And weird relations, almost a brother and a father, but we'll get into that. Biological father and an academic brother in this. So Don, welcome. And first question, Leonard Jimmie Savage. I feel like I don't know him. Can I call him Jimmie Savage? Should I call him LJ? What was? Tell us about Jimmie.
So nobody called him LJ, nobody called him Leonard. They would call him Savage, and sometimes with the English word savage, which I'll mention that. But everybody called him Jimmie, and he wanted to be called Jimmie. The way it happened was serendipitous. I mean, the whole story has really bad connotations. I mean, Jimmie's life was not very good, especially when he was a child, and I'll get into that because it matters. It really leads to things in his adult life and his attitude. But the big thing with him was his eyesight, and he was born with a congenital defect, and it was complicated by myopia. So that when he read something, he had to take it up to his eyes like this, and he'd turn, and his eyeballs were continually moving. It was a very sad thing that when he was born, back to how he got Jimmie, when he was born, his mother went through some bad things associated with the childbirth and wasn't able to pay attention to things like what's the name of the kid. And so at one point a nurse didn't have a name. So she wrote down a name. It was Jimmie with an I-E. And when it came time to name him, there was a tentative name, and then the mother sort of picked the name Leonard, but the nurse kept calling him Jimmie. Anyway, it stuck, and he liked it, so that it's his middle name, but it was also his nickname, and for reasons known only to him, he liked it. I suppose it was, everybody called him that when he was a young person, and so he went by that name. But it was, all his friends definitely called him Jimmie, and his enemies probably called him Savage.
Okay, so we should let people know how you know Jimmie within this. Maybe your relationship and how you met him in this.
So how I met him was easy. I was a student at Dartmouth, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had 3 kids. I was a math major, and Tom Kurtz, who I knew from, he built, along with John Kennedy, he built the basic language, developed it, and so he suggested to me and others in the math department, since I was interested in probability, I should go into statistics. So I applied to various places, and I got a fellowship at Yale, and went to Yale, and I met Jimmie when I walked into his office, because he was there. He and Frank Anscombe were the two big names. They had recently formed the department. Frank was the first chair, and then Jimmie eventually became the chair of the department. But it was small, and so I met him. I took a course from him in the very first semester I was there. It was a course out of Feller, and it was a course that undergraduates could take, but it was also for graduate students, and so I'll get into that. So anyway, that's how I met him.
Okay, awesome. Did he he became your dissertation advisor, and be interesting to hear about topics and what interesting parts of this. Did he teach a course using his book, The Foundations of Statistics? Did he teach a course in that?
Maybe he did at some point. Maybe he did when he was at Chicago. You know, it was published in 1954, and we're talking about, I was there in 65. So he didn't teach a course in his book, but it was sort of obligatory to read his book and to understand what was going on. And it was, I think he's the father of modern Bayesian statistics. How can you argue about that? Obviously, Bayes, and so Bayes deserves to be called the father of Bayesian statistics. But Jimmie really made it for Bayesians. I mean, it provided for the first time, throughout statistics, it provided for the first time a rigorous definition of what statistics was, that it was in fact a mathematical discipline. And he started out, just a little bit of that, he started out thinking that statistics, by the way, he was not a statistician. He got his degree in mathematics. He was working in and wanted to work in physics and chemistry. Chemistry turned out, that was sort of unfortunate because he couldn't see. And it was, how would he went into the lab? So eventually he really fell in love with statistics and the philosophy of statistics. What did data mean? And to him, he was a polymath. He knew everything. He knew everything about everything. I mean, it's just amazing, and I'll give you a few examples of that. But he knew about various economics. You mentioned economics.
Yeah. So Milton Friedman is quoted, and we never know if quotes are right, but is quoted as saying he's one of the few people I've met I would unhesitatingly call a genius, was what Milton Friedman said of Savage.
Yeah, and David Wallace, and everybody that knew him deeply thought exactly the same thing. I mean, it's hard to know him without thinking he has to be the smartest person in the world, because he seems to know everything, and with a depth that is phenomenal. So let me give you an example of that. And I'll give you an example. It's kind of a trivial one. I mean, I love to work with him. We worked on some examples in science that, of course, he knew about the science, and he brought me into it. His childhood had some ups. Mostly they were downs. We know about his childhood mostly because of Richard Savage, who was his younger brother by 8 years or so. And so Jimmie was Richard's father. Jimmie's father was instrumental in making Jimmie's life good and was a big positive. The rest of his childhood was pretty bad. But his parents bought him an encyclopedia when he was very young. And he read it. and he remembered it. Just a very simple thing about that. The main thing I want to tell you in a minute. So he one time said to me, he said, Jean, his wife Jean, is writing a project on Finland, and she's looking for celebrities in Finland. She can't find many celebrities. Do you know any celebrities in Finland that are Finnish? And I said, I think Victor Borge is a Finn. And he said, no, Victor Borge is Danish. How did he know that? Do you know what Victor Borge does? You probably don't know.
I do not. No.
He was a celebrity. He was a pianist. He was a comedian. And he had a piano that joked. I mean, he worked with the piano and various jokes in the piano. And he was really clever and talented, but not very well known. And he appeared in TV shows like Ed Sullivan Show, some, things like that. But he wasn't really very well known then, a little bit more known than he is today. So how did he know that? He couldn't watch television. I mean, he couldn't see. Wow. And his childhood, I mentioned Richard. Richard said that, and I wrote this down, he was a brilliant child, but he paid no attention to what was going on in school because he couldn't see what was going on in school. And his teachers said, you can't go to college. I mean, they put in really negative things about him. According to Richard, the prevailing wisdom in the school was that he was feeble-minded. Wow. So it was a very bad thing for his emotional circumstance. But so something that involves you, Scott. Mom, your mother, was pregnant with you. And she would go to the doctor, regular visits to the doctor. You have 3 older brothers.
Yep.
And the doctor would inevitably say, you're due for a girl. And she would tell me that, and I say, no, you're not due for a girl. And I mumbled things about, what the probability was. And I was really interested in that, separate from my own personal interest. How do you do this? How do you find the probability that the unborn is going to be a boy? And this was in the days prior to amniocentesis and any of these. And it used to be that people would say, pregnant woman would come into a room and they would meet somebody and they'd say, oh, you're carrying low. It must be a boy. And, it was really these sort of old wives' tales thing. Yeah. But so I was interested in impressing your mother with something that was legitimate. And so I said to Savage, I said, it's silly to use a maximum likelihood estimate, which is 1. I know it's not 1. So how do I do this? How do I find a prior distribution? Let's say I'm willing to accept that my wife and I have the same probability forever of a boy, but it varies potentially between maters. And so let's assume exchangeability. But how do I find a prior distribution? And so he got up and went to his bookcase and pulled out a book by Corrado Gini, Corradogini, who you may know if you're an economist about the Gini coefficient, which is used in especially in economics. And Gini turned out to be also a demographer. So I looked at the book, and in the back of the book, in the last half of the book or so, was amazing data on families throughout the world, Australia, Africa, the United States, on family size and number of boys.
Wow.
And it was truly amazing. I mean, when you looked at it, it was absolutely clear that it was not binomial. That was absolutely clear. And what was clear about it was there was a
beta distribution of this, a random effects.
Yeah,
Did
it could have
go
been
that deep? Yeah.
It could be. It looked like it was a distribution of p and a beta binomial, but there was an interesting aspect to that, some sort of an added effect. That if you looked at families with, these number of children, the family went up to like 18. Yeah. There wasn't very much data at 18, but let's say you went up to 12. And the proportion of boys in families of 12 that was one, that is, all of them were boys, was bigger than the corresponding proportion for 11. Yeah. Now, you know that in a binomial, it's 12 times in the other direction.
Right.
So something is going on. I eventually learned that there are some women throughout the world, and this was, constant throughout the world, some women who cannot carry a male fetus. And so that would explain a point mass. So it was a mixture of a point mass and a beta was fit pretty well. And I calculated that the probability you were going to be a boy was 57%. Based on that prior probability. Of course, it went up for the next one, and Mom and I had two girls.
So what's fantastic about that is first of all that he knew exactly what book to go to. He remembered that. What's amazing is I kind of thought maybe he's a pure theoretical guy with the foundations, and he came up with this amazing axiomatic approach to probability. But he worked in economics. Apparently, he has some aspects that maybe he brought Brownian motion to asset pricing. He worked with Milton Friedman. In World War II, he worked with John von Neumann as a mathematical statistician. I remember Edwards, Lindman, and Savage, where it was behavioral sciences he worked in. Sounds like he was actually an applied statistician despite being a genius mathematician.
Yeah, and he got his rocks off by looking at science and applying statistics. We had a fish expert that wanted some help, and he knew everything about the ocean and about diurnal effect and the like, and was really interested in it. We did another thing where I remember it was really neat. We did mathematics along the way. It turned out that along the route we saw that what the integral equation was that you had to solve in order to do this thing. But it was about a real application, like this thing, the distribution of gender in families.
Yeah. So, was he interested in clinical trials? I mean, you went into bandit problems. You talked about the bandit problems in clinical trials. Was he interested in clinical trials? And how did you come to the topic with him?
So, it was my topic. He was not into clinical trials. I mean, he was sort of like Fisher in that way. Fisher was amazing with his agriculture stuff. He was not into clinical trials. He became interested in clinical trials because of me. I mean, he was interested in strategy. You know, his other most famous book is How to Gamble If You Must, where it was based on a utility function that's different than a typical. Namely, there's an amount of money that you really want and need to buy an airplane ticket to go home, and nothing else matters. And so it's utility one above that, and utility. And then there are some strange things that happen in the strategy, and in particular, bold play is optimal. And so he took this seemingly small problem and built finite additivity, made it show why you need finite additivity and why it's more important. And so it was, and that was not unusual, where at the end of the road was a revelation about the mathematics. Yeah. Anyway, he was not interested in clinical trials. The one person who was Frank Anscombe. Oh. And so my initial, where did the bandit problem come from my perspective? I took a course in the management department. It was like the business school at Yale. And there I came across a problem. It was kind of like the one-arm bandit, where you ask yourself, should I keep playing this game? Should I keep pulling the one arm? And so but you learn over time, and you learn, when you've had enough and you're convinced that you're never going to win at this, so you go to do something else. And so I said, the two-arm version is even more interesting. Yeah. And so I started working on it, did some dynamic programming, did some computations, and I really became interested. And so I got Savage interested.
Did you think about Anscombe as an advisor?
I did, and I thought he was an amazing mind. I thought he was he was an amazing mind, and a great person, and a wonderful person to work with. But I was so one of the things I said in my comments about Savage, I said it was like the world around you, when you're with Savage, the world around you is tingling with intellect. And that was so attractive. And so, I knew he was interested in strategy. Yeah. And I knew that this problem would really interest him. I didn't know the name bandit. Eventually, I knew that it was called bandits. It's a very hard problem. Suffice to say that the computer scientists call it NP hard. Suffice to say that Peter Whittle, who worked in World War II, he was a statistician, worked in World War II on strategic things, said that they talked in the UK about making a one-sheet description of the bandit problem and dropping it on Germany so that the mathematicians would get hold of it and waste their time trying to solve this problem. So it was really hard, but it was so, I thought it was, I was doing clinical trials. And of course I wasn't, and that was the, that's the rest of my story. So what else did I want to say?
Interestingly, it ties into my comment earlier of academic brothers. So Jay Cadane was part of your committee within this. Jay Cadane, interesting, Maury DeGroot was a student of his, and Jay Cadane went to Carnegie Mellon. I went to Carnegie Mellon and became a student of Jay Cadane. He was my thesis advisor. So I in some ways, I'm almost your academic brother in this.
Yeah.
And my daughter, Lindsay, interestingly, her last two choices were CMU and Duke. And had she gone to CMU, she may have been Jay Cadane's student. And so it may have been that much more twisted. And interestingly, Lindsay was an honorable mention for the L.J. Savage Award for her dissertation in Bayesian statistics.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I have to mention the dissertation and Savage's role in it. I showed him my first draft. My first draft had only the beta distribution, and I had some really nice theorems when the prior distribution is the beta distribution. It was 10 pages long. And he said, well, this is fine. This is a dissertation, but let's try a little bit more. And let's try to, understand more generally. And so it ended up going through 5 drafts. And I tell you that every single one of them, he looked at every single word. He recorded what he was doing. You have to understand it's a little bit delicate because, of his writing and eyesight. But he would record what he was reading and explaining to me. He taught me how to write.
Wow.
And it sort of carried over. I mean, you've learned a little bit of things from me for writing, and it comes from Savage. The end was so well written that when I submitted it to the Annals of Mathematical Statistics, it was published in the last year of the Annals of Mathematical Statistics. After that, it split into 2 Annals of Statistics, Annals of Probability. And the associate editor was Tom Ferguson, a very famous decision theorist. And Ferguson didn't send it out for review. He read it himself. He approved it himself. It was published, 27 pages, and there were no revisions at the journal level. And it was impeccable because of Jimmie, who was he was a perfectionist. It was his downfall some. You mentioned some other people that might not have been so. I mean, I loved Savage. I mean, he was like a father figure. He was a father figure for me. And I'd have done anything for him. But other people had been in conversations with him that were not all that positive. I know Herman Chernoff, who I think is an amazing person, and I love him too. He's still alive. He's 101. And so I said to him, he's interested in sequential things. He was Jay Cadane's advisor.
Yeah.
So we were talking about things, mutual interest in sequential things, and he was interested in bandits. Chernoff, that is. I don't think he ever published on bandits, but he was very interested in them, and he had done some calculations on them. So the subject came up of Jimmie Savage. And so I mentioned, something about Savage. And he said some very disparaging things about Savage. And I said, but Herman, he was human. And Chernoff said, he had some human characteristics. So everything comes back to the eyesight and the way he was treated. Yeah. Let me just mention, I said I was going to say something about Bill Cleveland. Janice Cleveland was his wife. We had a party one night at Savage's house, and there were the women, the wives mostly, were talking, and Jimmie came up and entered the conversation, and Janice Cleveland said, Professor Savage, we're talking about children, and what are the good ages for children? What's your favorite age for children? And he said, your age. And now people laughed, but it was real. He was serious from his experience. He didn't want to be exposed to these people that had really done some nasty things. I mean, you can imagine the bullying and the like. So it's Schadenfreude. It was a very good story. He died too soon. He died at age 53 from angina.
Yeah, it's incredible. All he accomplished to work in the war and economics and the two books, the students he had, and he was 53. It's unbelievable how much he accomplished in that time.
Yeah. So I haven't told you. Maybe we can do another one. Can I tell you about my experience with teaching and with Savage?
Let's end it with that. So make it a bang. Make it a bang.
All right, here's a bang. So I had experience with Jimmie in this class I took, where he said, if ever I don't show up to class, he told me, he said, you take the class and just continue to where you think we should be going. So I was hoping that wouldn't happen, but one day it did happen. And so I got up and I said to the class, which was mostly undergraduate math majors at Yale. So we had homework last night. Anybody have questions about the homework? And there was a question, and the guy asked really the hardest question in the homework, and it had to do with the asymptotic tail of the normal distribution. And so I showed him how to do it. I started to show him how to do it. And then Savage came in, and I went up and I handed the chalk to him. He said, no, you continue. So I continued, and I showed him how to do the problem. But then I related the problem to some real things, and this impressed Savage. And he then asked me if I would be willing to teach a course at Albertus Magnus College. Albertus Magnus College was in New Haven, still is. It was all girls, co-ed now. But they had a statistics course that had not, they lost the teacher. And so they asked Savage if he could provide somebody that would do this. And so he asked me if I would do it. And he said, it's $400. This is a whole semester for $400. Yeah. And I said, sure, of course, in part because of Savage. And then I bought a car, a 58 Chevrolet, with the money, and I would give Savage a ride home with the car. And so one night he got into the car and he said, "So how's Big Al?" I said, "Big Al? Who's Big Al?" Yeah. And he said, "Albertus Magnus, the car. The car's name is Big Al." And so that's part of the story. And then he kept calling it Big Al. But then we had a very famous guy, and you probably heard of him, Fred Mosteller.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was Feinberg's advisor. Very famous guy, Bayesian. Didn't write a lot about Bayesian. He did the Bayesian thing of the Federalist Papers, you know, the authorship, the Federalist paper that was Bayesian. And that was him and somebody else. Anyway, so Fred Mosteller visited, and lots of people visited New Haven when Savage was there. You know, Dennis Lindley, George Barnard, Jerry Cornfield. I mean, it was a mecca to go to. And so when he was going back, Savage asked me if I would take him back to the airport, and he wanted to go along with, because they had worked together, he and Mosteller. So
you're in the car with Jimmie Savage and Fred Mosteller as they're chatting? That's awesome.
They're chatting, and they started to talk about some scientific problem. And I was lucky on that thing where I talked about the asymptotic distribution, the asymptotics of the normal.
The Mills ratio, I'm sure, came into that.
But here I was lucky too. They were talking about the scientific thing, and I kept adding things and commenting on what the scientific problem was. And so Jimmie says to me, "Don, how do you know so much about this?" And I said, "Well, I read the article in the Science Encyclopedia in the Stat Library." And his eyes lit up, and he was delighted. He said, "You know, I worked so hard. I had to convince Yale to let me buy that thing. And so what you said now makes it all worthwhile, that it is a useful thing." And it harkens back to the encyclopedia that he read, you know. I mean, he was really a human encyclopedia, but that's too technical a thing. I mean, he wasn't technical. He was brilliant and innovative, and I'm glad we had him in the Bayesian world. We probably wouldn't exist, Scott, if it were not for him.
So Barry Consultants is a lot to thank for Jimmie Savage. And so let's end it with 3 statisticians in a 58 Chevy named Big Al. All right. So Dad, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Until next time in the interim. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.